On this episode, we talk to Ram Sachdev about the history of Thailand's Indian community.
So if you want some great insight into one part of Thailand's fascinating cultural tapestry, you'll dig this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 when airplane seats were much bigger than they are now, although there might also be another reason why I'm less comfortable on an airplane than I used to be.
I wonder what that could be. And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 21 years ago. Fell in love with stepping outside and being enveloped in a comforting bear hug of humidity. So I never left.
It is palpable, isn't it? Especially when you come back from being away for a long time. You're like, oh man, this air is heavy.
I can feel it. I feel like the air in Thailand is just kind of holding me up.
An exoskeleton of atmosphere.
We want to say a quick thank you to one of our patrons, Sue Monroe, who supports us at the show shoutout level. Stick around after our conversation with Ram Sachdev on Bangkok's Indian community to hear why Sue might try to steal me away from Bangkok to create the Cleveland podcast. Oh my God.
I won't have it.
We want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons got a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our ad-free regular show a day early, emails with behind-the-scenes photos of our interviews, access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners, and various other goodies. But best of all, patrons like Sue also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about Greg's ongoing journey into niche nerd territory, my epic journey back to Thailand, finally, including a last-minute mistake that almost derailed the whole thing, and how Greg is rolling the quarantine dice for his own upcoming trip to Canada. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
All right, well, before we get into it, let's do a quick summary of Ed's triumphant return to Thailand. We talked about it in detail on the bonus show, but Ed, give everyone a real quick update of your journey back.
Yeah, so I was finally able to enter Thailand through the Test and Go program. As people know from last week's show, I finally tested negative. And after checking a whole bunch of boxes and making the long journey, I did get back to Bangkok. It's less than 48. It was about 36 hours ago. I touched down. I survived, and it feels good to be back.
Nice.
The intro was actually accurate because when I walked out of the airport, I enjoyed the heat, but what I noticed was just the atmosphere. Man, I just felt like I was walking through something. Like there's some thick. Right. The air is thick. But yeah, I'm back. I'm at home, and it's weird, but here I am.
It's like walking through the kitchen bead curtain at your hippie aunt's place. You know, like something's there. It's not holding you back, but you can definitely feel something in front of you.
No, the humidity. It is real. It's real. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, welcome back, man.
Thank you.
All right. Well, in this episode, we are going to be diving into one of the elements that makes Bangkok such a cool and interesting city, which is its fascinating mix of cultures. Now, anyone who has walked around the Paharat area of Bangkok, aka Little India, knows what I'm talking about, and that's what we're going to be discussing. Now, Thailand's Indian community has contributed mightily to Thailand's development over the decades, but we wanted to go a bit deeper. Now, with that in mind, our guest this week is Mr. Ram Sachdev, a first-generation Thai Indian and founder of Masala Magazine, which is the voice of Thailand's Indian community. He is also president of the Thai Indian Wedding Association, which helps put on some of those huge, colorful, amazing Indian weddings that most of us have seen on TV. So, to give us some insight into this really cool aspect of life in Bangkok and Thailand, here is my conversation with Mr. Ram Sachdev. Well, Ram Sachdev, I'd like to welcome you to the Bangkok Podcast and thank you for coming on the show. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you, Greg. Nice to be here.
Great. Now, this is a really interesting topic to me because I've long been very, very interested in Indian culture and the country. I've been there on a trip, and it was a mind blowing experience. And I've especially been interested in how Indian culture and Thai culture overlap and coexist because, as we know, the Thai culture is heavily inspired from other cultures surrounding it over the hundreds of years. Including Indian and other neighboring countries that have inspired it. So I would love to talk to you about how this all began. Now, the phrase that is commonly used for Indians coming to Thailand is called the Indian diaspora. So can you talk a little bit about that, how it started, what it means, and how it ended up in Thailand?
Thank you. And it's a very good question. Actually, it's a very broad spectrum question because when you talked about culture, linguistic, language, or religion, there are a lot of ties between India and Thailand. Basically, as you might be aware, a lot of the culture, a lot of the language and the religion comes in Thailand, actually has its roots in from India. For example, in terms of language, the Thai language is derived from something called Pali, which is a derivative of the Sanskrit language. So basically, fortunately, since I speak both Thai and Hindi, you might not believe this, but we have more than a few thousand words which are written almost the same but pronounced
Interesting.
differently. So basically, Thai has become a phonetics based language which draws a lot of its roots from Sanskrit. Then, in terms of religion, as you know, basically Thailand is predominantly Buddhist, and Siddhartha or Lord Buddha comes from India. All right, and then comes the culture. A lot of festivals that we have in Thailand, for example, like Songkran, it's just like a Holi, and I can cite many other festivals, which actually has its roots from India. Now,
Mm-hmm.
even the Thai cooking, which is Thai food, which is world famous, it's a fantastic cuisine. Also has part of it, Thai cuisine has got a lot of influence from India, from Burma, from China, But what do you call it? There's a process of cooking in India called chettinad, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the Thai cooking style with this, curry paste, gets its origin from chettinad. So this is about culture, language, religion, and food.
Well, I want to talk about food a little bit later on. Believe me, we're going to touch on that as a big fan of food in general myself. But I was reading a little bit about the Indian diaspora, and of course, India and Thailand have been very close trading partners for centuries. But it seemed like the emigration from India to Thailand really picked up steam in the mid 1800s. Is that a roughly correct assumption? I was looking into it, and that was when the British Raj was at its height, and things were sort of turbulent at the time.
A lot of the things that we read online nowadays can be misleading. As you know, everyone who has access to the net is a publisher, so you have to be very careful and really filter what you are reading. So
Sure.
first of all, I would like to first tell you that thank you. You're calling. We're having this conversation on a very auspicious day. Today is the 73rd anniversary of the Indian Republic.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it is also the 75th anniversary of the Thai-India trade relation or diplomatic relationship.
Oh, wow. All right.
All right. So that's 2 in 1. And there's a full year. And just to correct you a little bit, the actual exodus of Indians coming to Thailand happened very much towards the 1940s, let's say between
really?
1945 to 1947. And the real push actually came at the end of the British Raj, when they were just about to leave India. In 1947, before they left India, they actually divided India into two different countries. One is India, then we have East Pakistan and West Pakistan. And when they did this division, it was quite a small map with a very thick nibbed pen. So there was a lot of a problem as to where you are actually. So there was a lot of problem at that time between Hindus and Muslim. It's a very long story. And during this process called partition, when the country was divided into the two nations, there was a time of main exodus. People were fleeing for their lives during that time. It's a long established story, and there are a lot of movies made about this, which you can watch, or I can name a few afterwards. And what happened was, at that time, because of the urgency to leave, the border area, a lot of people took their belongings, whatever they can find. They can't take their house, their mansions, their field, their land, their cattle, nothing. So whatever they could, put into a small bundle and carry with them, they did that, and they fled from their homes. And
Wow.
then they came not to Thailand, they went to Malaysia,
Oh, really?
because at that time a lot of us misunderstood. A lot of the Indians who were fleeing the partition that time, they had the notion that a lot of Indians were actually staying in Malaysia. But when they reached Malaysia, they found that the Indian community there, of course it was from India, but basically were from South India. So
Uh-huh.
basically, the South Indians in Malaysia did not speak the same language as the Indians from North India. Don't forget, this is from the northwest part of India, from the Punjab region. So
Right.
basically, we did not eat the same food.
Okay.
Our cultures were different.
Yeah. So it was.
The only common thing we had was most of us were Hindus. But of course, during this partition, a lot of Sikhs also came, because we all identify ourselves as Indians. So to cut a very long story short, the Indians then came, they made their way, they found out that, Malaysia is not the right place for them, and they slowly made their way, trickled into Thailand. So we have a few remnants of Indian still in North Thailand, in Chiang Mai, in Chiang Rai, a little bit, but most of them came to Bangkok. And also, when coming from South Thailand, from Malaysia, a lot of us also actually settled in Hat Yai,
Oh, okay.
Songkhla,
Yeah.
before coming all the way up to Bangkok.
Right. Wow. That's fascinating. It's so interesting because, I mean, people often can maybe forget how massive India is and how many languages and religions and unique cultural tweaks that the population has. It's not just sort of one homogenous population of quote unquote Indians. It's very, very dynamic and fractured, and there's a lot of differences, as you just explained. I didn't know that they went to Malaysia first.
Well, then comes the main story. Now, this is going to be very interesting, because what I'm going to tell you is going to be a big surprise for many people. We Indians in Thailand are going through, or have gone through, a huge problem of mistaken identity.
Oh, okay.
Before we Indians came to Thailand, the Thais, their only understanding of khaek, the word khaek. Have you ever heard of the word khaek?
Yes, the Thai word, roughly analogous to the word farang for Westerners.
All right.
Kek means people of Indian descent.
Let me just correct you. The word, my apologies. The word
Not
khaek
at all.
literally means guests, a
Okay.
guest. All right. And it was commonly referred to the Malaysian Muslims coming
Okay.
from Malaysia into Thailand, especially to the south of Thailand. There were words, we Indians, when we came to Thailand, we were all referred to as bangs.
Oh,
Now, bangs means brother, but it's again Malaysian. So
okay.
we are Indians, we are not bangs. And what do you call it? We were misunderstood as the Muslim Indians coming from Malaysia. And they
Oh,
even
okay.
used the term khaek, Malayu.
Okay.
All right. So we had to go through a huge transformation. For that particular reason, about 12 years ago, me and my team, we actually published or established a magazine called Masala in Thailand. All right. It is the only publication for the Indian diaspora, but its main purpose is to connect the Thai Indians to the Thais in Thailand, to make them understand who we are. But you might be a little bit surprised that we Indians, we are a 400,000 strong community in Thailand. Now, this 400,000 strong includes both the expats who have come from India to work in Thailand, which may account for between 85 to 100,000. The rest are basically Thai Indians who were born in Thailand. I am a first generation Thai Indian.
Oh, interesting.
All right.
Okay.
Though we are small, we are about just we make up 0.01% roughly of the Thai population, but yet the Indian community contributes almost 8.25% to the total GDP of Thailand.
Wow. That's some interesting stats.
Yes.
Now, let's talk specifically about how the Indian community got established. Again, specifically in Bangkok, because this is the Bangkok podcast. I mean, the area called Pahurat today is sort of AKA Little India. It's where the Indian community is roughly centered in Bangkok. Can you talk about how the community was accepted or how it was seen here? Was it easy for Indians to assimilate into Thai culture? Was there some rough patches? How did the Indian community get a foothold and establish itself and grow in Bangkok?
Greg, that's a very difficult question, and I have to be very careful in answering this because sometimes the truth may hurt, but I'm going to try and attempt to answer this in the best way I can. First of all, when the Indians started to settle in Thailand, as you know, we were just a handful of families that started to come over here. So we started off as traders, or let's say our fathers and grandfathers, started off as traders. And one of the first business that they were trading in was textile. Mm-hmm. And commodities. This is relatively easy because it was you buy and then you sell. General trading, buy and sell and make a profit. And since Sampeng, was the center of the textile industry in Thailand, a lot of the Indians actually concentrated their housing and their small residences in that part of town.
So for those not familiar with it, Sampang Lane was before Yawarat, before the main road in Chinatown. Sampang Lane was the main road in that area of Bangkok.
Correct. That's right. And it was the center of the textile business. All right. Mm-hmm. And the Indians, as you might know, they are a very hard-working group of people. They helped each other, and slowly we began to grow. More Indians started to come. And as business flourished, so did the affluence, of the Indian community. And then they were slowly moving from that area, the Little India area, the Paurat area. Sampeng was predominantly the wholesale market for textile, whereas Paurat was the retail center for textiles in Bangkok. Okay. And as the Indian became more affluent, they started to move away to the Thornbury side of town. So basically, a lot of them started to stay, in an area called Siyak Ban Khaek, which is just across Sapan Paputa Yotfa, and not so far from Paurat. Now, your second part of the question, which is the difficult part, is were they assimilated into the Thai community, or what image they had? The Indians at that time had no rights or no legal rights to buy land. They had to wait for their children to be at the age of 20 to be able to buy land in Thailand.
Okay.
Because, they would be the first generation of Thai Indian. So I can buy land in Thailand because I was born in Thailand. But then how would they grow their business? Apart from textile, many of them started to invest here and there. But then again, investing was not very easy because in whose name would you invest in?
Right.
So basically, a lot of them became money lenders.
I see. Okay.
All right. Or in your language, loan sharks. All right. Not because they wanted to, but what were they supposed to do with their money? They can't buy land. They can't build factories. So basically, most of the Thais or industrialists at that time, when they were refused by the banks and they had no choice, they approached the Indians who gave them loans at that time. Right. And, the risk factor was very high. And as you know, that when the risk factor is very high, it is normal for the returns to be high also.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Classic bank strategy.
Correct. And as you know, it's always easy to borrow, but a little bit more, or let's say a lot more difficult to give back, to return.
Yeah,
So
I'm very familiar with that.
yes, so it very often happened that the Indians would, go back to their customer and ask to be repaid their loan, or for their loans to be serviced. But that's when things started to go sour, and there were slogans coined at that time, like it would say, if you meet a cobra or an Indian, who would you hit first?
Oh,
And the
geez.
answer is the Indian. So and that is because they were not able to service their loans. And of course, things changed after that when the children came of age and they could buy land. Then the Indians started to not just become textile traders, they became industrialists. They had textile mills, they had dye mills, they had all sort of factories, and the growth was exponential.
So it sounds like the early days of those loan sharking and things. I mean, that was an industry born out of just a lack of options. What else am I going to do? I can't own land. I can't buy a building. I can't do anything. So
Absolutely.
it was just sort of like, well, let's do this. So after many years of this, then they finally were able to, like you said, to buy their own things and establish a foothold and become real Thai citizens, quote unquote.
Correct. We had a lot of Indians also come from a place called Gorakhpur, from the central India. And
Okay.
they were not traders like the Punjabis. The people from the other parts of India were also very good, hardworking. But, since they lacked capital, they were selling nuts,
Okay.
peanuts, groundnuts, other type of nuts with some masalas, some spices in them. I mean, they survived. We had a lot of Indians who actually came here and raised cattle, and they were milkmen. So we Indians, we love dairies. We have our own cottage cheese, and we drink a lot of milk, unlike the Thais at that time. So basically, we had a small diaspora at that time, which was self-sustaining, which was helping one another, and the money was in between them. But at
Yeah.
the same time, since most of them were speaking either in Hindi, Punjabi, or in English, there was not much communication between the Indians and the Thai. Whatever went through the media was either misinterpreted, or it was completely wrong. And
Mhm.
basically, the image of the Thai Indians were a little bit bad.
Man, it just sounds like you had to be a hustler back in the day. Like, no one's coming to your aid. No one's going to help you. You've got to be responsible for your own everything. you know.
We were responsible, but we were never hustlers. It was part of the Indian culture to help each other, especially in
Mm.
time of need, and that's how we grew.
I don't mean hustlers like as in the meaning of like cheating people. I mean just like you've got to work, you've got to connect, you've got to make business deals and
And we
connections.
worked very hard, Greg, very, very hard.
Yeah, yeah.
So to because of that wrong image of the Indians, this magazine has now been around. This Masala magazine has been around for 12 years, and I can tell you one thing: that right now, in the year 2022, you can find Indians, Thai Indians, in all walk of lives, in every aspect of the Thai community, every aspect of the Thai business, from politicians to pilots to engineers to entrepreneurs to industrialists to financiers. We have branched out into every business conceivable in Thailand.
Mhm. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's explore that a bit about Indian identity in Thailand because I'm a foreigner. I've lived in Thailand for 20 years. And even if I get Thai citizenship and I'm a full Thai citizen, I will never really be Thai. I will never be really considered Thai. I'd be the Farang with the Thai passport.
Mhm.
So, how do you feel as a first generation Indian in Thailand? How do you feel about your identity? Where do you identify as Thai or Indian or both? And where do you draw that line?
Man, that's one of the toughest questions. One of the toughest questions. You see, because to be very frank with you, uh, I was born in Thailand. And if somebody, I was actually talking to a client of mine about 20 years ago. a client who came from England to do some work with me on the publishing side. And when I was doing my calculations in Thai, he snapped at me and said, "Hey, Thai is your mother tongue." So I said, "Why do you say that?" He said that because when you do your mathematics in Thai, that is your mother tongue. So I'm a bit confused. I think in Thai, I think in English, and I think also in Hindi. So we are very difficult to. Right now, we are still soul searching as to how we are. To answer your question, you'll have to, be a little bit philosophical. So we are basically like a flower, a rose, with a color and fragrance. So the color belongs to one culture, to one identity, and the scent belongs to another one. You see,
Ah,
so when we are in Thailand, even though we feel a lot like Thais, we can never say we are 100% a part of the Thai community just because of the skin, the color of our skin. Our looks, our features. We are totally different from the Thais. So, big question: when there's a football match between Thailand and India in Thailand, who are you going to support? And the
yeah,
answer is mixed. The answer is mixed. Those with very deep Indian roots will also, support the Indian team, whereas the younger generation, will definitely support the Thai team.
right.
And then how do we feel when we go to India? When my daughter went to India about a few years ago at the age of 26, she actually had a cultural shock.
Right. I was going to ask about the young generation and how they would answer that question. How
Yes.
how do they define themselves?
So it's many people will answer these questions differently. Some will say, "Oh, my heart is Indian, but my soul is Thai." But there's a lot of. It's a very difficult question to ask. In my family, we are Thai Indians, but the majority of our meal constitutes of Thai cuisine.
Hmm.
We hardly eat Indian cuisine at home, maybe once or twice a week. Of course, we eat other cuisines also, but the predominant cuisine is Thai.
Right.
Now that's
Right.
very odd, and this is something I want to tell you. When Indian tourists come from India to Thailand, almost 80% of the Indian tourists every third day, or maybe even the second day, they have to get some Indian food into the system. Otherwise, they can't exist.
That's a very Thai trait as well. And I love to tell a story about how years ago my wife and I were in Austria, and we were at the Mozart Museum seeing all these amazing cultural historical things. Mozart was born here. Mozart used to sing in this church, and she was the most excited when she saw a Thai restaurant because she could have Thai food.
Right.
So as we're wrapping up here, I want to get a sort of a deeper insight into how the Indian community is divided among itself. Is it, you were talking earlier about Punjabis, is it divided by religion or the region where their fathers and grandparents were from? How does the Indian community break itself down?
Exactly what you said just now. We are basically a lot of cultures. We are Indians. But as you know, India is a country rich in culture. So we have many different cultures and many different communities. Sorry, in Thailand, which is basically defined by the region that they came from. So basically, the Punjabis, the Sikhs, the Sindhis are all from the Punjab region.
Hmm.
All right. Then we have the Gujaratis and Marwaris, which is from the Gujarat and Rajasthan. And then we have, the Namtaris also, which is another sect, which is very much also Punjabis. The one common thing between most of the Indians, is that most of the Indians are very affluent. Number two, even though Little India used to be the area where they used to stay, it doesn't it's no longer holds true. The majority of the Thai Indians now actually stay in two areas of Bangkok. One in Sukhumvit,
Mm-hmm.
and second is in the Thonburi side, which is called Tha Pra and Siak Ban Khaek. So these two areas are the areas where we have a lot of Indians staying. We like to stay in clusters.
Right. I live in Tonbury myself, as does my podcast co-host Ed. So it's we like to think of it as the cool side of the river. Final question, almost a final question. In 50 years, in 100 years, Will there still be a distinct Indian community in Thailand? Is there enough sort of self-sustaining self-identity to manage that going forward, or will it eventually just sort of merge into one big Thai community?
Again, you're asking a lot of difficult questions, but
That's a hard one.
my forecast is we will always retain the Indian identity, always. And I'm going to cite you some reasons. When the Chinese came into Thailand, all right, they look everything just like the Thais. In fact, the Thais are from the Chinese. You know about that, right? From the Han,
Sure, the TAI is from southern China.
Correct. All right. So basically, we Indians don't look like Thais, even though we are now marrying a lot of Thais and a lot of non-Indians. We will always, for the foreseeable future, retain our identity, because in India, we have a few things like culture, religion, tradition. All these things are glue that holds our society together, our communities together.
Right. That's how I feel when I eat a plate of poutine from Canada, because I'm Canadian. So it's very central to my identity.
Right.
Well, final question, Ram. We ask some of our patrons to submit questions for upcoming guests. And a few of our patrons have asked me this question, and it was something that I was going to ask anyway. Now, this is very controversial for me to say as a long-term Thai resident, but Thai cuisine is my number 2 favorite cuisine. My number 1 favorite cuisine is Indian. Where do you go to eat in Bangkok if you want really good Indian food?
Well, me and my family, we are all foodies. So we go everywhere. I'm not going to mention the name of any particular restaurant. I cannot do that because I'm a media. And by doing so, I might be doing something wrong. So basically,
Right, okay.
all I can tell you is most of the Indian restaurants in Thailand are very good. Some have exceptional tandoori, food. Like their grills and tandoori items are very good. Some restaurants have fantastic curries. I can name a few of the top Indian restaurants in Thailand. For example, like Indus, Charcoal, Punjab Grill, Jol. They are all good. Rang Mahal. They are all good. But at the same time, you'll find a lot of smaller restaurants also, which are pretty good. But this restaurants which I mentioned, their quality is very consistent, even though they are a little bit on the high price. But it's if you can't go wrong at any of these places. They're all fantastic.
I tend to agree. I think, I've got a little hole in the wall Indian joint around the corner from my place, and I have a deal worked out with the guy that owns it. If I go in the morning and ask him to make, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, kheer.
Kheer, yes, that's the dessert, right?
Yeah, the dessert. He'll make up a batch that day, and then I can have it in the evening because that's
wow! Next time you're invited to my house, I can make you some nice kheer. And just for your listeners, just a bit of statistics: the most searched recipe on the web is that of butter chicken.
Of all the recipes.
Yes, of all the recipes in the world.
All right, it's a classic dish. You can't go wrong with that one for sure.
Maybe too many Indians are searching it also.
Yeah, right.
don't forget if you line up the whole world, in a single line, every second person is going to be a Chinese, and third person is going to be an Indian.
Well, how can we compete with those numbers? Come on, that's an unfair advantage.
Okay.
Well, Ram, thanks so much for coming on the show and talking. It was very educational, and as you schooled me on a couple of things there. There's an incredibly complex history there with Indian culture and how it came to Thailand. So it's a fascinating thing to talk about, and I always urge our listeners to get out there and explore Bangkok. And Paharat is one of the most exciting and enjoyable places to wander and get lost around. And it's just a really cool culture to explore, and it's great that it's right here in our backyard in India. So, well, Ram, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And you're involved with a lot of other aspects of Indian culture and Indian business in Thailand, so maybe we will have you back on in the future to talk about those, because there's a lot of really cool things to discuss.
I look forward to that, Greg, and thank you very much for having me.
Man, I love these interviews with, I don't know what to call them, like members of Thai subcultures. I think people sometimes tend to look at Thailand as homogenous, but it's really not homogenous. Like, it's not.
No.
I mean, okay, maybe Thailand is not as diverse as the US or Canada or Toronto. It's not as diverse as Toronto, but Thailand is filled with all these cool subcultures, I guess you would call them. And one of them, of course, is the Thai Indian subculture.
Yeah, totally. And that's what Ram and I talked about as well. Like, Thailand has borrowed its food, its religion, its architecture, its language from all these different sources, and it's sort of like it took the best pieces of them all and put them together into this really unique melting pot.
No doubt.
So it's got a very interesting facet of the culture here.
Yeah, so I really related to your intro where you mentioned colorful Indian weddings, because randomly when I was home, I was hanging out with one of my friends that I grew up with, who was born in the U.S., but his parents are Indian immigrants. And we happened to watch his wedding video because he ended up going back to India for his wedding, and I wasn't able to go. So this was 20 years ago. He got married, but I wasn't able to go to his wedding. So I ended up watching a video of a very colorful Indian wedding, and it wasn't even just obviously the colors are a factor, but I was I've known his wife over the years, but I never saw her in her wedding. You can't even call it a dress. I would call it like wedding attire. And it's so cool. And I mean, whatever, as a guy from Ohio, it's just exotic. I don't know what other word to use for it.
Purely, yeah.
It's just so cool and different. And it's funny because me and my friends, we got into a conversation about how plain Western like weddings look, because like Western weddings are just black and white.
It's literally like you got a tux in a wedding dress.
Yeah. And obviously Western wedding dresses are beautiful, and I know the dresses themselves are complex, but man, if you put like a traditional Western wedding next to a traditional Indian wedding, man, is it different.
Dude, tell me about it. And I think I brought this up with Ram really quickly, but I went to India for a wedding about 15 years ago. My friend Sonal, who I went to film school with, she got married in India. She's her parents are Indian, but she was born in Canada. And it was just exuberance made real. It was just colorful and loud and every superlative you could imagine. It was just this amazing, beautiful, just joyous occasion. And you're right about the brides. Like when Sonal came around the corner, and I'd never seen her done up fully like that. Like, she was the most beautiful bride I had ever seen up to that point. She was just an angel. And, the whole wedding was like that. It was just over the top, so much fun. And it's so cool that Ram is involved with bringing those weddings to Thailand, because what a cool mix that would be. Like an Indian wedding in Thai culture would be super fun.
No, I love these shows. We got to do more shows on subcultures in Thailand. I just find it fascinating. And I think that obviously we've got a bunch of Thai listeners out there. I think that they might find it interesting as well, because I think we talked about this with Meta expat Joe Cummings, this idea that part of the Thai identity, I don't think they've really accepted how diverse they are. It's like I think in the Thai mindset, they're kind of homogenous, but the reality is Thailand is diverse, and it has always been diverse.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's always been diverse.
It's something to be proud of, right?
Well, yeah, no, but I don't think Thailand has ever embraced its diversity. That's just my opinion.
Interesting.
So I love these. These shows on subcultures in Thailand. We need more of them.
Yeah. Well, we do have some coming up with some different subcultures, so that'll be fun.
Cool.
And maybe we'll do another show. We'll have Ram back on to talk about specifically the wedding stuff, because it's a big business.
Sure, that'd be great.
Super fun.
Yeah.
So many thanks to Ram for coming on the show. And if you see a copy of his magazine out there, Masala, they're also online. It's a very good publication. They got really interesting stories, and it's all well done. So again, thanks to Ram, and I hope to get to see him in real life one day, perhaps over some delicious Indian food, which we also talked about during the interview.
Sure. Thank you, Ram.
Yeah. All right, let's get into some love, loathe, or live with, where one of us picks a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something that we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as something that we just have to learn to live with no matter how we feel about it. So last time, Ed asked me what I thought of the Thai phrase bakwan. So this week, it is my turn. Now, Ed, you have brushed your teeth before, I'm assuming?
Occasionally. I do occasionally, yes.
Good to hear. So I don't know what you're like, but when I go to the store, I look at the toothpaste and I don't usually look at it too carefully. I'm like, yeah, it's green. Yeah, okay, that's good. It's probably mint in the basket, and I don't pay much attention. Have you ever gotten a tube of toothpaste home, put it on your toothbrush and put it in your mouth, and you realize that it is the salt toothpaste?
So I've encountered this, but I do think it was rare. I would not say I randomly grabbed toothpaste, but I'm not too specific.
So what do you think of it?
Is it supposed to be some kind of traditional? What is it?
I think it's supposed to be like an abrasive, like it's sort of like
Right.
putting sand in a sandblaster or something like that, but a much more gentle version. And of course, it's water soluble, so it melts down in your mouth. So, but it's just shocking because I've always assumed that it's going to be like minty fresh or
Right,
Colgate
right.
or something.
Right,
and then I
right,
put it in
right.
my mouth, and it tastes like a salt lick.
Do you know if it's a Western thing or is it some Asian or Thai traditional medicine thing? Do you have any idea?
Not a clue. No, this was actually a suggestion by someone on our Discord server called Striving to Fail, which is a funny name. And it's a good one because as soon as he said it, I was like, yes, because I've never experienced it in Canada. The first time I ever did it was here. And I'm like, what the hell did I buy? Oh my God.
Oh, it's funny. So I've had the exact same experience where but it is rare. Like I might have done it once or twice where or it might be like just a tube that was at a hotel or something where I just like tasted it and I'm like, it just tastes different. And you're like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Like toothpaste is not supposed to taste like salt.
Yeah, it's a really shocking experience.
Well, I guess I would have to say loathe just to the extent that I would not intentionally use it. Like it's not like loathe, like I want to leave the country, but it's just I would never buy it or I would never
Yeah.
use it. I would never use it intentionally. I don't get the point of it.
Right, same. And if I had to use it, I would probably grimace my way through it. But yeah, I'm going to say loathe for me too, because I thought toothpaste was supposed to taste pleasant.
I wonder if it's some aspect of like Thai traditional medicine, like that saltiness or salt, because salt is abrasive itself, but a lot of other things are abrasive too. Like I don't think you need to have salt to have the frictiony feeling, you know.
Loathe for me too. Yeah.
So as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we'd like to say thank you to Sue Monroe for lending us her support at the show shoutout level. And Greg, what did you find out about Sue?
Well, as it turns out, Sue has a connection to your hometown, Ed, in Cleveland.
Damn.
And Sue and I exchanged a few emails back and forth. She seems very nice. And she sent us a really lovely email. She says, I first discovered the Bangkok podcast last year in the midst of the pandemic when I was really missing travel and seeking out podcasts to partially fill the void. I hear you, soul sister. They filled the entire void for me. It's all I do at home now is listen to podcasts. I was hooked after the first episode and look forward to it each week. For years, I've had a fascination with learning about Thailand and Thai culture. My husband is half Thai, and my first visit to Thailand was about 10 years ago on our honeymoon. My second visit and my last international trip before COVID was a combined 3-day layover in Bangkok when I made a solo trip to Bhutan in November 2019. Bhutan's awesome. I've always wanted to go. That's a hardcore destination.
Agreed.
She said, my husband and I have toyed with the idea of moving to Thailand at some point, and your podcast has been both educational and entertaining. So that's good to know. Maybe we can convince more people. Maybe TAT can give us some money to be like the voice of expat emigres.
Hell yeah. I'm all for that.
Yeah. It's funny too. She said that story because my mom always tells me this story. This is a total non sequitur, but she says my mom flew through Thailand on her honeymoon in 1974, and my dad, who was not such a nice guy apparently, he didn't want to get ripped off by a taxi driver, so they didn't see anything. They went from the airport to the hotel, and from the hotel back to the airport. He didn't want to go to the Grand Palace to see a temple or anything like that.
Okay, but was he ripped off?
No, because he didn't go anywhere. They stayed in the hotel.
Okay, so your dad wins. Your dad was right.
Technically true, but anyway. And check this out. Sue says, an interesting coincidence is that, like Ed, I also grew up outside of Cleveland. I grew up in Chagrin Falls and went to high school in Gates Mills, and a lot of my family still lives in Shaker Heights.
All right. Well, let me clarify. It's pronounced Chagrin Falls, and it's actually where I was staying when I was back there.
Oh, really? I'm not sure these things are even real places. Chagrin Falls and Shaker Heights. I mean,
Shaker Heights. Heck yeah, super famous. But I find Shaker Heights super annoying because I did not grow up in Shaker Heights, but a lot of people around the U.S. or even around the world, they know that suburb. So anytime I tell people I'm from Cleveland, they're like, Shaker Heights? And I just say, no, I'm not. That's not where I'm from. But Chagrin Falls, awesome east. It's not really a suburb. It's just like a small city east of the city. Super cute, super nice. But yeah, not Chagrin, dude. Chagrin.
I don't know. Shaker Heights sounds like a stovetop topping recipe to me. What do I know? She says, I think Ed and I are roughly the same age, so who knows, our paths might have crossed growing up in the 80s or 90s. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area now, but can totally visualize and can relate to all the stories about Cleveland that Ed has been sharing recently. This is all really nice and all, but I'm kind of getting a little bit jealous here. I'm a little bit wary that Sue is going to try and steal you away to start the Cleveland podcast, and I won't stand for that.
Well, I think one problem with the Cleveland podcast is it would require reasons to go to Cleveland.
You just did a whole journey away from Cleveland, and you don't want to go back.
Well, I'm just joking. The simple truth is, I have a blast every time I go back there. And if it wasn't for the cold, I might even consider moving back. But like you and I were chatting before the show, I think the cold means I'm not going to move back there. I mean, maybe I'll go back every summer. I don't know, but. Moving back, I don't think I can handle the cold anymore.
Well, maybe if you pick a nice neighborhood like Jumbaloo Falls or something like that, maybe it'll be good. Well, that's cool, Sue. Thank you for your support, and I'm glad that you have something in common with Ed here. But please don't take him away because he's all I got in the podcast world.
You need me.
I need you.
I find that hard to believe, but I'm just going to go with that.
Cool. Thanks, Sue.
Thank you very much, Sue. A final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Yeah, we do. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can send us a voicemail online that we'll feature on the show, or even reach out to me directly on Twitter, where I am BKK Greg. So thanks for listening, everyone. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you back here next week.
For sure. The bottom line is I made it back. As everyone knows from last week's show, I finally tested positive, and I was able to enter Thailand through the test.
Wait, negative.
I'm sorry. So what did I say? Did I say positive? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me say it's okay. Back up. It's very confusing, this stuff. Okay.
You're just so used to being positive now.
That's right.
It's like your default setting.
Okay. Right.